listening to the Adventure Party for the first week of June 2022. This week, the party discuss what we're learning from our most recent games and how we overlooked such obvious things for years. The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and daily gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
I'm Shane.
And I'm still Savage. Is that ever going to get old? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, and today we're talking about always be learning. What are you learning from campaigns that you're currently in, that you're currently running, and yeah, bring that to the table in future. So, gentlemen, do you have any campaigns you're learning from right now?
I wouldn't say what I'm running now is technically a campaign. So I'm sort of between big campaigns at the moment, and as a sort of side thing, I'm trying out the Scarlet Heroes system, which is designed to have one or two players and the GM, and for them to run through and survive old school dungeons, even at low levels. And running with very few people and in a less classic, more old school environment has been educational, but we may come back later. Nick, have you?
What was the question again?
Are you learning from any campaigns you're in or running?
Yes. Next question. To answer that question properly, yes, don't start land wars in Asia. But okay, to answer that question more properly, yes, I'm only playing in games at the moment. I'm not running anything. And I've discovered about myself that I've become very intolerant of a lot of things that GMs do. I've become incredibly impatient as a player, and we'll reflect on that a little bit later.
Right. Myself, I'm also between running campaigns. This seems to be a trend. But I am playing in a bunch at the moment, and one of them in particular is a Werewolf the Apocalypse game. But it's set in Cyberpunk's Night City circa 2025, and this campaign world this campaign is the third in a series, and there were two previous games, one a Vampire 5th edition set in the 60s, and a Vampire 20th anniversary edition set in 2020. And the world has been shaped somewhat by player actions, especially the less than moral vampire parties. Although the werewolves are starting to make their presence known, let's just say. So yeah, I have played in campaigns with continuity that were set in the same version of a setting, but not so much historical games, and I say historical very loosely, with decades of time jumps. So it's been an interesting experience, and lots of examples of how you can weave previous elements in, like. For example, vampires obviously can last a long time. There have been clones, so characters that would have memories from a century before are still knocking around and not technically supernatural. And yeah, it's given me food for thought.
This is how you get 40k. Just be careful. Just say that now. Okay, so what concrete things have we learned or realised? Because my in-head canon title for this episode is "Why Are You So Stupid That You Never Realised This Before?" What's wrong with you? A little long. We might not put that in the title card.
A little harsh, but perhaps not unfair, depending.
Okay, who's got a takeaway then? These are all obviously our own experiences. We have to now distill from the fruity juice, from the pulp of what we've been doing, something we can give to the audience. Dear audience, don't worry, we haven't forgotten about you. You're there. You're also experiencing things. It's all just everything all at once, isn't it? Wow, this coffee is strong.
I think from my end, just the main thing I've been learning is this new experience of the one-on-one game, where the maximum number of players I've had in any of these games has been 2. So, and that was only one time. So the most of the time it has been a single player character. Usually I give them a couple of NPC allies. Sometimes that's been very important. Sometimes it has been not nothing to write home about. Some they're just a distraction. But it has been interesting seeing this sort of deep focus. Means that you have to go. People. I know there's been accusations that having less players will mean you go through a dungeon much faster. I'm actually not finding that as much, because when you have less players, that means you sort of have to go into more detail, and you have to really go into like what does this mean? What are you trying to do? And are you trying to do something specific? Well, I have been finding like the fights have been going quicker because, as I say, Scarlet Heroes has this very simple thing of an old school monster's level is essentially its hit points. So the NPCs and the monsters will generally die in 1 or 2 hits, while the PCs just sort of have their own larger pool hit points to get them through. So fights tend to be relatively small, and they're a much smaller part of experience than you would expect for a dungeon crawl where there's everyone's rolling for initiative and back and forthing, and it really gives the idea that like when you're in a situation where one player is doing 90% of the decision making, the decision making tends to be faster and more direct, but also there tends to be a lot of decision making and asking questions that maybe in the interest of time, when people don't want their friends at the table to be sitting around bored, they might try to just muddle through with a half a plan, just in the interest of pacing. But in this case, you get more questions, more asking for details, and less, but not zero, calls for skill rolls. Like a lot of stuff you can just say, oh, well, the player has their trait is a sailor, so I'm going to say they automatically succeed in this sailing check. There's no point, they're not sailing through a typhoon. We can just say that they got through it. But like you still get some things that's just like, can I decode this clue? My character has the wander in the wastes thing. Maybe they've seen this thing in the wastes and they say, sure. But an awful lot of time, information can just be given out automatically, and things that aren't tremendously risky or unpredictable, you can just say, oh yeah, you stick the 10-foot pole in the gap and that blocks the poison gas coming out, you're fine. The other thing I guess I've been learning from this is old school combat has... Actually, I should point this as like, I still find one of the big things of combat. Combat is still swingy, but like on both sides, I guess is the best way to put it. It's just like one of the big complaints of it's something like 3.5 or Pathfinder combat is that very often either it's we know who's going to win, it's going to take us 5 rounds of chewing through hit points to get there, or we failed our saves in the first round. We're all starting to turn to stone or something, and it looks like we're all breaking up. But then, the wizard remembers he has the wall of fire scroll in his pocket and uses that and shuts down the counter, and so it swings back and forth in these dramatic ways. And you have this sort of feast or famine problem where combat is either perfunctory or super deadly, but you're not sure who's going to be deadly too. I guess what I'm saying is that combat in this doesn't seem to be that different, because the systems in Scarlet Heroes are designed so like a single hero will just chew through like a dozen goblins in a round or two without much worrying about that at all. But then they'll get to like I put in like a boss monster with a couple too many hit points, and it's got 3 attacks, and they all hit. Doubles for damage. No, them. Oh dear. And that's, I guess, why I put in all those NPCs allies, both to absorb blows and to drag the PC out of there when they get beaten to death or have their arms ripped off by gorillas or whatever should happen.
Well, in the best traditions of sword and sorcery fiction, there's always a companion or two who the hero can interact with and also variously be endangered or help the hero get the hell out of there if needs be. So that actually fits into a proud literary tradition.
have to be careful about how many such experts I have in, because some, like, I know one person went in with like pet leopard in the old school tradition, and also like 2 random caravan guards he'd recruited. They had a relatively easy time of it, but then they were being very careful, and one of the guards just kept rolling amazingly on their attack rolls and smashing up skeletons and stabbing ghouls in the face, and the other one could not swing a sword to save their lives.
Clearly he transferred all his skill into the other one.
Clearly. Now one of them is retired with the gold he got from one adventure, and the other one has becoming a hero in his own right. So, the ability of the narrow focus to sort of build up more personal stories has been interesting, because, like, having your little companion, your sidekick, and having them die horribly or save your bacon has been a big feature of that thing.
For disclosure, I've actually played in one of these sessions, and my hero he only lost one companion, despite his own best efforts. Did pay for the funeral and did give the survivor the pre-arranged split of the loot, which was enough to retire on as well. That seems to be a trend. I found that the combats didn't last long, mainly because my lad's a fighter and was just mulching through goblins. But that meant that more of the session could be spent on exploration or character interaction. So I think that's something of a hidden benefit from a lot of these OSR type games, because I've heard a lot of people claim that, old school D&D is all about combat, when the reality is it's more the newer versions of D&D that get focused on combat.
I know I've ragged on this before, but I do think an awful lot of the things that are laid at the feet of old school gaming are often more a symptom of second edition, which is the edition of D&D that was around when the internet was taking off. But I've ranted about that before.
For the days when knowledge dungeoneering actually meant something.
So, Mick, thoughts?
Like I said, I've become quite impatient as a player because of my experience as a GM, and it is something you should watch out for. Don't allow yourself to become that kind of player who sort of says, I wouldn't have done that, or why are we doing this? This is so cliched or obvious. You've got to give your GM their space to work. And some things about the form of entertainment simply demand that certain things are done. But that said, it is well worth your time looking at your own GMing style after you've been frustrated as a player and saying, right, what fat can I cut away here? What chaff am I still mixing in with the wheat when I run a session? As GMs, we tend to fall back on certain padding techniques like shopping or like a lot of NPC backstory rambling, things like that we don't necessarily, we're not doing ourselves or our players any favour. So keep a focus when you're playing a game. If you're a GM, just notice those moments of irritation. Take note of why they're making you kind of wish that the session would hurry up or the combat would progress, and figure out how to address those issues when you're on the other side of the GM screen. Could you make an argument for, look, we've got this combat sewn up, we don't need to fight out the last 4 rounds of it, we've got better things to do with our time, let's bring things to a conclusion here. Don't be a slave to the system, you're the narrative control, so you're allowed, say, and then the fight ended, and you won, way! If you find yourself doing a lot of talking and the PCs aren't doing a lot of reacting, then you're probably just waffling on in character, having a rare old time, but not necessarily doing anything to move the story along. If there's vital information that NPC has, perhaps summarize that after talking to for a long time, you learn the following 2 things about the wretched Mole King. It's that kind of stuff that look for those pain points when you play, and figure out and realize and reflect on the fact that your players are probably feeling the same way at certain points when you run the game. So try and use those moments of irritation, those grains of sand in your clam, as the foundation for a pearl of wisdom. How's about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a healthy attitude.
But it only occurred to me this year. I'm like, why am I so stupid? Never saw this.
Well, sometimes it takes experience to realize, well, the obvious, or what you might regard as obvious now, like. But
Absolutely. Let me think. What else have I learned? Before I throw back to you, Dave. There's one other thing I've kind of learned recently is take your role-playing shops and use them in other games. Use them in other forms of games. This is possibly even the opposite of what I've just suggested, but I don't think there's any harm when you sit down to play a board game. Really kind of get into the theme. If you're a bean farmer, then find that bean farmer within you, the bean farming game. Bonanza, is that one? It's no harm, and if you're the kind of person who can kind of come up with stuff on the fly, it's no harm to sort of inject a little character, a little fun, a little role-playing into something like a Eurogame or a card game or a board game. Let me tell you, there's nothing quite like roaming around the Blackstone Fortress with a couple of close friends, while in character, sort of threatening to seduce one of their mothers. Sort of what's the Blackadder character? Rik Mayall played him on occasion. Kind of a dashing, channel that guy into 40k, and all of a sudden you're going to have a rare old time. It might not make the game run any quicker, but it will certainly take something that can be quite a dry procedural combat puzzle affair to another level. Because sometimes you'll get another player coming back at you. You can have a great old time, even in a game as wretched as Talisman. You can have a great old time if you and another player just get into a bit of a spat and start ignoring the actual objectives and murdering each other across the table, or the game table. Take a little bit of role-playing and try and inject it into Agricola or Power Grid or any of these other things, and just see if you can get some reciprocation from some of the other players and turn the whole damn thing into a more memorable and enjoyable experience. Right, back to you, Dave.
Yeah, learning. I suppose another thing I've been learning from Shane's game, despite my limited experience with it, is I haven't played an awful lot of old school type stuff, and yeah, there are certainly reasons why people are quite excited and into this style or these styles. So certainly going to have to. I feel interested in exploring that a lot more. Which I was inclined to anyway, but it's nice to see some evidence of why this is a good idea.
I would say that it's certainly given me appreciation both for a bit of sword and sorcery, which is what the tagline is on Scarlet Heroes, but also I am gaining more and more of a appreciation for the various procedures that keep getting things. Like one of the things the most recent session was we were in a more sparsely populated dungeon, and it was like I was having trouble really keeping in my head, well, it's supposed to roll every 3 exploration turns, and I guess that's 1 per room they go through. I guess they've gone through this maze counts as 5 rooms, so I'll roll twice, but the chance is only 1 in 6, so it doesn't come up. And I realized some of the stuff I needed would be, when they roll a 1, there's an encounter, but when there's a 2, they hear something in the distance or see tracks. And I sort of began thinking in terms of what modern OSR people, who I do not hate, I keep repeating this, call the overloaded encounter die, where you roll for your random counters, but every pip of the die has something happen, even if it's just you have to change your torch. I guess the thing about trying something brand new has been the main thing. Is it's given me an appreciation for different things. Like, as we said, exploration as a thing, puzzle solving. That's a thing that I don't think would be possible in many larger campaigns. But when you have one person and you can quickly sketch out a puzzle in front of them and go through their process, some puzzles will benefit from having multiple people. Some will benefit from having one person focus on them. Yeah, it's just got me to try an awful lot of different things that I wouldn't have tried in my usual big sandboxy, shenanigansy laden, lots of skill rolls with extreme results either way style.
Any final thoughts, Mick?
Let me think. Final thoughts. We all stand to learn something every time we play. Exposure to different systems, not a bad idea. What have I learned recently? Not much. I'm getting old. I'm putting aside learning, or at least I'd like to think I can. But really, no, you can't. When you think you know everything is exactly the time to start looking for something else to learn.
I would say that I've learned, and I think one of the things I've learned is that variety is one of the best eventual. Both in the way of, if you've GM'd a lot, you should play some. And if you've played a lot, you should try GMing just to learn what is on different sides of the tables. And the thing that you do all the time as a player suddenly becomes very annoying when you're GMing for that, and vice versa. But also to try different styles. Yeah, maybe you've heard that old school DMing is a horrible slog of encumbrance values and random death, but there's nothing stopping you picking up a copy of one of the various free rules hacks and some first level dungeon and just playing through an evening of it and see how that feels different. Does that, maybe you hate it and it makes you appreciate your own style all the more, or maybe you learn something that you wouldn't have learned had you stayed with your usual thing. Similarly, fantasy versus sci-fi. Maybe you prefer one, but you can try the other and see if the shift in the camera and the different assumptions of the different settings, maybe it gives you more insight in other directions, I think. Dave, what about your historical gaming? Has it given you a greater appreciation of continuity between campaigns?
Yeah, I know some very specific examples come to mind. I suppose it helps that there's a mix of real world people and some very memorable NPCs that are cropping up, and even NPCs that aren't, or former PCs that you hear about or encounter. The last time that PC showed up, it was in a game, they were possessed by somebody. What's the story with them now? Like that sort of thing. Because the players know that something's up. The characters are, well, they get to find out.
Some might call that what's called like discontinuity or metagaming, but I think the point is that it's meant to be dramatic irony, where the audience knows that there's a bomb under the table, but the characters maybe don't.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of relearning in character each time, and the thing is, the different parties are going to be seeing things from quite different angles. And yeah, I think I'm happy to leave it there, gentlemen. I think we've learned enough for today, and this party is over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventurePTY. Or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike of version 3 license.